Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we introduce today's speaker, Mr. Sahil Bhargava, I would like to tell you all a little about the Career Talk series. My name is Shiv Kapoor, and I'm in the 12th grade at Head Start Education Academy, Bangalore. We, my sister and I, saw the lockdown as a great opportunity to expose students not only in India, but around the world to a spectrum of careers. We hope to do so by bringing professionals from various domains to share their experiences and knowledge with us. Today, we have our 14th speaker, Mr. Sahil Bhargava, to talk to us about the field of finance. Sahil Bhargava has worked in a variety of roles in finance. He is currently the CEO of startup Bharosa Club, which is focused on improving financial literacy in India. Prior to Bharosa Club, Sahil was a co-founder of a new age lender in India called APAC Financial Services that is focused on making loans to lower income Indians possible. Sahil began his career in the United States in investment banking, private equity, and hedge funds, working at some of the leading financial services firms in the world. And as such, can give a broad perspective on the various paths open to someone looking to make a career in finance. Here are a few housekeeping rules to keep in mind before we begin. Kindly remain muted and keep your videos off throughout the session. Do not annotate on the screen. And lastly, please put your questions in the chat, and we as moderators will pose the questions directly to the speaker on your behalf. Mr. Sahil, you may take over from here.
Great. Thank you, Shiv, so much for that introduction. And I just wanted to echo a little bit of what Shiv said. I think time and investing your time in this Career Talks series because it's really an investment in your future. And something we're going to be exploring today is finance. And a big part of finance is actually making investments for the future. So you guys, by being here, taking the time to listen and explore paths for your future, are doing exactly that. And I think it's really, really terrific. And thanks to the Inflow team, Shiv, Rajiv, Tara, and Vijaya at 5 a.m. Careers. I think it's all wonderful initiative that you guys are doing. And with that, I'm just going to share a presentation that I've prepared, and then we can get started exploring the world of finance. So give me 1 second. See the screen share. If not, someone on the chat, please let me know. Okay, great. So look, before I get started, I just want to let you know what I can advise you guys on and what I can't advise you guys on. So actually the bulk of my education happened abroad in the United States. So I won't be able to speak a lot about the curriculum you guys are seeing in high school and how that translates to finance. But what I will be able to talk to you guys about is the various options, what you do in finance, what finance is all about, and the various job roles that you can do there, both on an international perspective as well as an Indian perspective, because as Shiv mentioned, I was an integral member of founding a finance company in India. So I have a good understanding of the Indian environment and work environment also. So hopefully this will be a very informative session for you guys, and happy to address questions after the presentation. So great, let's dig in. Okay, so just exploring what finance means. So I'm sure you guys have had other talks, and I'm sure it's been relatively straightforward to understand what a computer scientist does, or what a fashion designer does, or what a sports management person does, because those are things that we understand intuitively. We understand what the term sports management means. But do we really understand what finance means? It's such an abstract term. So I want to spend a little bit of time exploring what this concept actually means. So the book definition is kind of pasted on the screen here, right? And it basically says finance is defined as the management of money and includes activities such as investing, borrowing, lending, budgeting, saving, and forecasting. This doesn't really help understand what finance is intuitively. So I want to take a deeper look into truly understanding what role finance plays. Can we figure out how it helps the economy? What benefit does finance create? And then understand how financial institutions actually work in the economy. So let's try and dig through that together. So the best way to think about finance and the role financial firms play in the economy is to think of them as a matchmaker of sorts. And while they're not setting up brides and grooms, what they're setting up really is savers and people that need money. So in an economy, you have basically two types of people at a given time. Some people that have too much money for their needs. So you can think of this as people that are saving for the future. They're earning more money than they're spending, and they don't need to access that money. And on the other side of the coin, you have people that need more money than they have. So you can think about these as people that want to invest in something. So it may be they want to buy a car, it may be they want to buy a house, they may want to invest in education for their children, they may want to invest in education for themselves, get an MBA or something like that. They may want to open a new business. They may want to open new stores in an existing business. So there are various reasons why people need access to money that they don't have. So basically, what finance tries to do is it tries to take money from people that have too much money and matchmake to give that to people that need access to that money. So it's all about playing that role. So when you think about the role finance plays in an economy, you can think of that. They're a matchmaker that helps give people access to money that need it from people that have too much money, right? So let's take a deeper look at how this transaction actually works. If I have too much money, why would I ever give that money to somebody else, right? There has to be something in it for me. So essentially, the way the transactions work is you have the saver who has too much money, right? You have the borrower who needs to use that money, right? And the way is the borrower uses the money and agrees to pay a fee to use it called the interest rate, right? You may have heard this term. So when you borrow money, for example, you have to pay a fee, the interest rate, back to the person that gave you that money, right? And what the finance firm does is the finance firm helps make this transaction happen. How? It finds the people that have excess money, the savers, and at the same time, it finds the good quality borrowers that need the money. And it helps match the two. And in as a reward for the work it's done, it takes a portion of the fee. So part of that interest rate comes back to the finance firm and part of it goes to the saver. And that essentially, in a nutshell, is really how finance works on a very simplistic level. So why is this important for the economy at large, right? Why do we need this function to happen? Well, basically, finance allows the money supply to be recycled. And they basically said, I have too much money, but I'm just going to keep it under my mattress. If I needed to raise money to invest in my business or my education or a house or whatever, it would be very hard for me to find the money to invest. But finance helps to recycle that money in the economy and make it cheaper for people to achieve their dreams. So that's really what you're trying to do when you're in the financial services space. You're trying to lower the cost of making dreams happen. So it plays a very vital role in the economy. And if you go into the financial services space, that's kind of what you can think of your role in a big picture as helping to do. So now that we understand the role finance at large plays, I want to cover a few of the different types of financial firms that exist. exist. So you may have heard of some of these, right? So you have banks, you have insurers. So these are pure financial services companies, right? So let's understand each of them at a very high level. So let's start with banks. What do banks do? So essentially banks, and we all probably, use banks. Some of you may have your own bank accounts already. But essentially what we do when we're in a bank, right? In our bank account. And essentially, banks use that money to lend that money. And when you withdraw from the bank gives you, one of the reasons is they get an interest rate, right? Remember, we were talking about the fee, right? On it, right? So you may get 3-4% these days on your savings account. And that's how a bank functions. It basically plays that matchmaker role by raising deposits from depositors and lending that money out to people that need that money. Shiv,
Yeah, you're disconnected in the middle. Now we can hear you.
you can hear me? What was the last thing you guys heard? Hello?
You were at this banks take deposits and then give the money out.
Okay,
And
had I finished the bank topic or?
No, you were kind of
Okay,
wrapping
so banks basically, okay, great. So now that we kind of understand the banks, let's move to insurers.
Sahil, we can't see your screen.
Can't see the screen. Okay, let me.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Sorry guys, technical difficulties, but hopefully we're on track now. So the insurers. So what are insurers all about? Well, there's certain risks that people cannot afford to take themselves in life. So pretend that you got a new car, okay? And let's say that one day you're driving your new car and you hit technically the damages caused on that Bentley or Ferrari an insurer agrees to protect you from these costs that may come up in life that you will not be able to afford on your own. And the way they do this is they raise excess money from people and they basically use this money to protect customers that cannot afford these risks in return for a fee. Just like a bank charges an interest rate, an insurer charges a premium. So that's kind of how insurance works. The other kind of finance firms that you'll see are called investment funds. So I worked at a few of these, and essentially the way this works is you raise excess savings from people who give you money to invest for them. They want you to invest that money in companies that need it, or real estate, or basically areas of the economy that need that money in return for big fees that will generate them profit, right? So that's kind of what an investment fund does. And then you have wealth managers. And what wealth managers do is they advise people what to do with their excess savings. So let's say that you start working, you've got a lot of money in your bank account now, and you're wondering what to do with it. You may call a wealth manager, and that wealth manager will tell you exactly, what you should do. Put it in this mutual fund, that mutual fund, etc., etc. So they help people deal with the excess savings. So in sum, all of these funds do what we were talking about earlier, which is they help transfer excess money from those that have too much of it to those who need it, right? In different ways, right? So that's kind of the pure financial companies that you can see in the marketplace, and some of the entities that purely focus on finance. Now, there are also finance roles at every company essentially, because that aren't even focused on finance. So it could be, your company is in, like let's take Disney as an example. Disney is in entertainment and theme parks and all these kind of things, but they have a very big financial department also. Why? What does this financial department do? So there are actually three main roles that the finance department performs in a company like Disney. Now, again, remember the core goal of finance is helping the company decide what to do, if it needs to borrow money, or if it has too much money where it wants to invest that money, right? So all those roles are going to focus around those. So one of the areas is accounting. So what is accounting about? Accounting is about creating the data that allows companies to make the proper decisions that they need to for their financial health. So it's all about creating the statements and the numbers, okay? And then you have a role called financial planning. This is analyzing the amount of cash that a company is producing and determining where to invest that cash in the future, and also developing metrics to monitor that the company is doing well and that the cash it produces keep doing well. And then the last main area that you'll see in finance in companies is treasury. And this is focusing on helping the company raise money. Let's say Disney wants to open a new theme park. It needs to raise the funds to do that. May not have the money to do that. So how does it raise that money? That's what treasury is all about, and managing the excess cash also. Okay. Now, okay, that's a lot of stuff we just covered. I can make this presentation available to Shiv and he can circulate it to you guys. I know we covered a lot, but that should give you a good flavor of the different types of roles that finance plays in the economy. Now I want to get to the heart of what a finance job is all about. Right? What are you trying to do in finance? Essentially, we're trying to make decisions about the future. We're trying to evaluate risk and reward. Okay, so everything in the financial ecosystem depends on the finance firm finding good borrowers, right? It's not enough just to find a borrower, right? We want a borrower who's going to pay us back the money and the fee. Because if he doesn't pay back the money or the fee, then the saver that gave us the money is going to lose their money. And that's a terrible result for a finance firm. So at the heart of finance is finding good borrowers that are credit worthy, that will pay the money back, right? So a lot of finance work revolves around evaluation of how good or bad a borrower is, and what kind of fee we need to charge the borrower to compensate us for any risks we're taking. So, so borrowers can refuse to pay for a couple of reasons, right? One is they can just be bad guys that want to fraud you, right? Or they could be really good people, but something went wrong in their business, right? Maybe I borrowed to open a new store, and maybe my store didn't do well, and maybe it failed, right? And I don't have the money to pay you back, even if I wanted to pay you back, right? So when we're in finance, we're trying to evaluate both risks. What is the risk that this person is defrauding me and he's just a bad guy? Or what is the risk that this person is a good guy, but his business may not succeed, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to evaluate. So what I like to think of in terms of what financial professionals try to be, we try to be a combination of detectives and fortune tellers. Detectives in the sense that we need to understand deeply who is this borrower, what are his characteristics, what does his business look like, is this a good business, is this a bad business, what are the problems with the business. And then we also need to be fortune tellers. We need to look to the future, and we need to say, how do I think this person is going to perform when his loan needs to be repaid? Is he going to be able to repay it? Is his business going to do well? Is it going to run into problems? So that's kind of what we're doing in finance to make good financial decisions over time. So what kind of people are suited to a career in finance? So people who like to work in a fast-paced environment, first of all. There's a lot of time pressure in finance because we're all competing in finance to compete on lending to the same borrower. So the savers and borrowers have many options to give and borrow their money from in the marketplace. It's not just like you're running the only financial firm in town. As a result, there's a lot of competition to be fast and accurate when you're working in finance. So jobs in finance tend to be pretty intense. They can be stressful, high pressure. Not all roles, but a lot of roles tend to be fast paced. The second is people that like to analyze data. So the nice thing about finance is you don't really use complicated math in most roles in finance. Most of the mathematics that I did was stuff that you guys could do in your sleep. You know, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, kind of stuff. Some statistics here and there. There isn't calculus and all this complicated math, but you need to have a joy for numbers. You need to look at numbers and like finding patterns in numbers, look at ratios and try to figure out what they mean. There's a lot of that kind of work in finance because you're digging into the details to uncover facts about businesses and how they're performing. So one of our best tools for that is looking at the numbers of a business. So really having a joy for numbers is pretty important. Then one of the things that is pretty important is enjoying thinking about the future and making predictions. Finance is all about predicting the future. And a lot of people like doing that, and some people don't like doing that. If you're the type that likes to think about, hey, where's the world going to be in 5 years? Or, are people going to be buying more, biscuits in 2 years from now or less biscuits 2 years from now? That's the kind of thing that we do a lot of in finance. So if you like that kind of stuff, it's a good fit. And the last and probably the most important is digging into details. As I mentioned, we're detectives in finance. We pore over documents looking for the littlest details about a person's character or a business's quality and reading every little thing we can find about it. So if you like digging into details and really immersing yourself in data and facts and understanding the nuances of industries, then it can be really fun. So let's look at the different, so assuming that, this is a fit, let's look at the different areas open to you if you work in finance. So I've organized these based on the different functions that a financial firm kind of produces. So first is raising excess funds. So the first role of a financial firm is they need to attract the money, right? All those savers that have too much money, we need access to their funds so that we can lend them to others. So roles in this area of finance are around essentially marketing. They're like sales roles. You're trying to attract those funds. So there's branch operations. You can be involved in running the frontline branches that attract depositors to come in and try to create new accounts and branches. You can work in private banking and wealth management. So this is dealing with high net worth customers. So, and making sure you're giving them good service and giving them good investment ideas and all these things. That can be a very good role for you on the, raising excess funds side, marketing and sales. So people that tend to fit in well here are people that like people, they like talking, they're good communicators. They like putting spins on things. You need to be decent with numbers, but numbers are less important in these roles than they are in some of the other roles here. You still need to be, understand numbers and be reasonably good at them. But more important here is kind of being polished and a good communicator. The next key bucket is finding good borrowers and users of these excess funds. Once you've raised those funds, you need to find good places to put them. This is really where the detectives and and fortune tellers belong. The people that really enjoy digging into the details, analyzing data. You need to be a good writer for these roles or presenter, because a lot of times you're going to have to present conclusions to your bosses. So being good with PowerPoint, being a good writer of memos, etc., is really, really important. Good communication is really important here. Less important is being a salesman, or being able to spin things and all is less important here. But this is a really fun role for people that like digging in deep into data. Then you have the risk management side. So this can be people that work in the risk management arm of banks. So they make sure that the bank is not taking too much risk in one industry or another industry, or they haven't given too many unsecured loans or things like that. And also actuaries in insurance firms. So actuaries in insurance firms, they basically help insurers figure out how much to charge for different things. Life insurance at the end of, right, that I die is pretty low. Policy at the age of 60, my policy is going to cost a lot more because I'm older. And so the risk that I die at an older age is higher. So actuaries help make that decision in ensuring, in figuring out how much to charge on insurance policies. And that's very heavy statistical work. So if you're really into numbers and you really like trying to predict the future using statistics and models and all those things, then actuarial sciences is a great field. And then the last area is monitoring performance. So once you've made the loans to borrowers, you need to make sure you get paid back, right? So that's collections, portfolio management, recovery, accounting, financial planning. These are basically areas where you're focused on monitoring how things are doing. And this is kind of also number crunchers do well in this kind of role as well. Less emphasis on communication skills here. So if you're into numbers, not so much into communications, this is a good area for you to get into. So that's kind of the roles as I see it. Look, I'm probably missing a few roles here and there, but this is pretty a broad set of different options available to people in finance. And it'll give you a good flavor of what you can do. Okay, let's move on. Okay, how to prepare for a career in finance. So if these things interest you, if you feel like it will be a good fit and you're interested in finance, how do you prepare yourself best for these roles? So the best things that I'd recommend is get in the habit of reading. Reading is a common factor amongst a lot of financial roles because you need to be up to date on the markets. And the best sources for reading, I recommend you guys get a Wall Street Journal subscription if you can afford it. It's a little expensive, but it's really, really good writing. It'll help you understand over time what's going on in the world of finance. And initially, it may be hard to understand this, but over time, as you get practice, you start understanding more and more. And the other is The Economist, which is also another great magazine that has very, very good articles on the economy and the financial world globally. So I recommend these two publications in particular. Other good ones are Financial Times also. The next one may sound a little silly, but it's actually really important. It's get familiar with Microsoft Excel. So Microsoft Excel, if you don't know, it's a Microsoft product that's available on most computers with Microsoft Office. It is essentially a supercharged calculator. It is one of the most useful tools that not just people in finance should learn, but everyone should learn because it's so, so powerful. And about 90% of my work in finance is done on Excel. And the remaining work is done on PowerPoint and Word, etc. So really getting used to Microsoft Excel, all the functions and shortcuts is super, super important. The next is the startup that I'm running now is all about financial literacy. I have a lot of content on my YouTube channel that's available for free on how to analyze a stock from basic, starting from ground zero, etc. So if you're really interested in finance, you want to start understanding how to do some of this stuff, you can subscribe to my channel and just go through my videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Um, um, and yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of get up to speed on some of the basics in finance. And the last is start following the stock markets, the US and Indian markets. So you can watch CNBC and just absorb the information. Don't try and understand all of it, but just try and absorb it passively. And over time, you'll start following more and more, and you'll get in the flow of finance. So that'll get you doing all these things will give you a really good head start on cracking the career path in finance if you do them. Okay, so the last thing I kind of want to focus on before telling you a little bit about my story and how I got into finance and where I went in finance, et cetera, is I just want to give you a brief snapshot of a day in the life of a financial analyst. So this was kind of my day when I worked in some of these firms, and it'll give you a good flavor for the kind of work that we do and what you can expect if you go into finance. So my day used to start early because I was in the West Coast of the United States and the market was on the East Coast, right? So your hours in finance are really going to depend on where you're situated relative to the market. In India, there's only one time zone, so it doesn't matter. But if you're in the US, then the market's on the East Coast. And if you're on the West Coast, you're going to work the market hours. That's why I started very early at 7. So I'd get into the office at 7. I'd start by reading the news, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Economist, catch up on the markets, look at my old emails, basically just brush up on stuff. Then around 8 a.m. or so, the real work would start. And generally the way it would work is my boss would call me on the phone and say, hey, Sahil, I want you to analyze this company. Can you run a model on this company? And when people say run a model on this company, basically what they're talking about is building a simulation of the company in Excel at a very high level. So what we want to do is basically we want to create a very simple, it's actually not that simple, but a simplified version of the company that we can play around with. Okay, maybe it sells a little more products this year, but then it sells less next year and a little more next year. What does that mean to the financials of the company? So we're trying to create a simulator of the company, if you will, in Excel. So I'd work on that for my boss. By 10, maybe I'd finish that. Then I'd go into his office, discuss it. He'd ask me questions about it. And then I'd revise it and finish it off, and we'd review it together. So that's kind of like a high level screening deal for finding a company that we want to invest in. Then at 12 p.m., maybe I'm working on a serious deal, okay, which is one which we're almost getting ready to do. So this requires serious work. So I start working at it at say 12 p.m. and I'm deep in the details on this company. They've given me access to all the data that the company has to offer. I have access to all their reports, all their annual reports, board minutes, all their financial statements. And it's my job to go through. This is what I'm saying when we're like detectives. I'm going through everything, trying to find the important stuff. So there's a lot of reading, a lot of analysis, but it's really fast-paced and fun. You're learning about different companies, different industries on every deal. And this is hard work. So at 6 p.m., maybe I'll take a break for dinner. In the US, we eat early, right? Here at 6 p.m., dinner is too early. And then maybe at 12 a.m., I finish my work and I go home. So that's a long day, right? 7 to 12 a.m. Not every finance role is that intense, but the most intense roles in finance can be like this, very fast-paced and long. But it's also extremely rewarding. You're working on very, very cutting-edge stuff, Wall Street Journal, front page deals, and it can be really exhilarating too. And as a young professional, there are few careers where you'll get more responsibility than in finance and in these high pressure roles. As a 28-year-old, I was having one-on-one meetings with CEOs that were 45, 50 years old, top of their careers, and they were treating me like a peer. So there are not many careers where you can jump like that. But finance is one of them, which is what makes it exciting and why it's worth the hard work, in my opinion. And it's a great training ground to give you a lot of skills of analyzing companies and understanding a lot about different industries. So I'll just cover now my story and then we'll break for Q&A. So, okay, my background, I studied mainly in the US. And when I was in school, I noticed that I really liked two subjects a lot. One was math and the other was history. And, at one point, I wanted to be a history major in college. And my family talked me out of it, thankfully. And I studied economics instead and got into finance. But the reason I picked economics was that it was a blend of math and history, and to some extent, because economics involved making predictions of the future, data analysis, and all, which were all mathematically oriented. But a lot of the development of models and all comes from understanding history. Our best guide for understanding the future is understanding the past. So it really synthesized two of my favorite subjects. So then I decided to do economics. I studied at University of Chicago, loved the subject, but I found that it was a little too theoretical for me. I wanted to be more applied. So then I went into finance. I did an investment banking internship and I loved it. So I worked in investment banking after graduating. Then I moved into private equity. So private equity is an investment fund. It means you raise money from excess savers basically, and you use that money to buy companies. So we would try and find companies that we thought could be improved and that we could do something to make the companies better. And that was kind of what we were doing. And then I moved to a hedge fund, which is essentially very similar, except you're doing it with listed companies. You don't actually own the company fully. And I loved the work I was doing. Then I decided to move to India. My wife is from India and she wanted to move back. So we moved back to India and I love it here now. And I actually joined the founding team of an Indian startup that was working in providing loans to affordable housing customers and small businesses. And so it was very rewarding for me. I was the number 3 employee on the team, and now there are probably 250, 300 employees on the team. It was really great taking it from 3 to that level, and it gave me a lot of experience in the Indian environment. And now I moved on to my last, latest journey, which is promoting financial literacy. So doing a lot of what I'm doing here, which is trying to explain finance in ways that people understand it and get benefits from understanding finance. So that's kind of my story. And with that, I'll open it up to Q&A and then we can close.
Okay, so let's begin with our first question then. What experience would you suggest a high schooler gets in order to experience the field of finance before deciding whether to enter the field or not?
So good question. I think the best if you can get an internship in a firm, not necessarily in a financial services firms, because the internship programs are very structured for them and they typically only look at college students for those kind of roles. But if you can find an internship in a and really get involved and see what they're doing there, that will be a great lens into whether you like the work or not. If you can't do an internship, then I think a lot of the things I was talking about earlier, exposing yourself to finance by reading the Wall Street Journal, by reading The Economist, by watching CNBC, are these things interesting to you or not? Do you like digging into markets or not? And that'll give you a flavor for if this is something that you'll enjoy.
So the next question is about how important are skills like Excel and stuff, which you have covered. But I'm going to modify that question to be, other than Excel and PowerPoint, what other skills would you suggest people practice as students?
Writing. writing and communication are so important, not just in finance, but in pretty much any role you do in a corporate setting, because ultimately a lot of the work you do needs to be communicated to other people. And what I've found that the Indian education system is very good at teaching a lot of things really, really well, which is, the mathematics and the science and all that stuff. One area that I've seen differences in the aptitudes is in writing. And if you can complement the skills you develop with the Indian education system that are outstanding on the maths and sciences and all, and couple it with strong writing skills, I think that combination is fantastic. And you can flourish in finance that way. A lot of the work I did in finance was writing and communicating the data that I found in my work. How do I make it presentable and understandable to people? So that's super, super important.
So you mentioned briefly what a hedge fund is, but could you share with us a little more detail about what a hedge fund does, etc.?
Okay. So the term hedge fund, it means basically like hedging your bets. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but it basically means protecting your downside. So the reason that hedge funds were created is that markets tend to go up over time, but there are periods where markets can fall and crash. And hedge funds were created to protect people when the markets crashed. So people wanted hedge funds to hedge them against losses on the downside. So you can think of a hedge fund like any other fund, like a mutual fund that invests in stocks and tries to make money for their investors over time. But they also engage in shorting stocks also, which protects them from downdrafts if the market corrects.
Okay, so the next question is, I'm not sure which grade this high schooler is in, but if he was to pursue a career in finance, which path would be the best or the most suitable?
So that'll depend on your individual characteristics. I think, we covered some of the roles and the temperaments. If you're into, you really like meeting people and chatting with them and, socializing and all these things, then a front office sales role will be very good. So you want to be in roles like private banking, wealth management that, are client facing. If you want to be more on the analytics side, then you could look at private equity, hedge funds, investment banking, where you're doing a lot of analytics and data analysis. And if you're really into the number crunching and you don't want to deal with communication and PowerPoints and all these things, you can look at the operations side, which is around collections and portfolio management and monitoring, etc. So the ideal role really depends on what you like to do, right?
So the next question builds on this one, but it's a more specific one. Which undergraduate course gives better or easier qualification for a typical Wall Street, which is investment banking or stock broking? Is it a BSc economics or a BSc finance?
So good question. The honest answer to this is that both will prepare you well in terms of getting the job. Some schools do not offer a BSc in finance and only offer you an economics program in the US, right? A liberal arts school or something like that, right? If your school doesn't offer that, don't worry, a economics degree will prepare you well. But if your school provides you a finance degree, that'll be the most suited for you, right? The truth is that I did not do my undergrad in finance. And initially, I was at a little bit of a disadvantage versus people that had done their undergraduate in finance because they knew a lot of the information that I had to learn. But you're able to learn it really fast. And a lot of the finance firms recognize that. So you're at no disadvantage to the finance majors. They look at you equally.
The next question is, if I study MSc in pure maths, will that help me gain a role in finance?
Absolutely. I think, look, I have a lot of respect for anyone that can do an undergraduate degree in mathematics. It's a very, very hard subject. And generally, people in finance look very favorably on people that are able to do undergraduate degrees in things that involve numbers and rigorous analysis. So whether it's physics, whether it's mathematics, a lot of these subjects will also translate into a Wall Street role if that's something you want to do after doing those roles. But you should be prepared to answer a question if you did do a undergraduate degree in mathematics, which is, if you wanted to go into finance, why didn't you just do finance? And there are good answers to that. You could say that, look, I wanted to take the most rigorous classes I could, and math was one of the most rigorous majors that was available, and I knew I could learn the finance, along the way, right? So you could definitely translate to Wall Street with a math degree. You just need to position it right with the recruiters.
So I'm not too sure what this next question means, but I'm just going to convey it across to you. Other than MBA in finance, which are the other areas open for finance students to build their career in terms of employment opportunities?
So, MBA is an interesting one. I happen to work in financial firms where you didn't need an MBA to progress. There are some firms where an MBA is required, but now increasingly an MBA is less and less necessary. And you're finding more and more firms not require an MBA for you to advance in your career. I think the key to advancing without an MBA is you really want to demonstrate maturity and the ability to do the softer sides of finance. Because at the junior levels, finance ends up being very data heavy, analytics heavy. But as you become more and more senior in finance, it's a lot about the soft skills. Can you meet a CEO of a company and handle the meeting well, right? That's not something you learn in undergraduate mathematics or anything. It kind of comes with experience and maturity that you gain over years, which is why people like seeing the MBA, right? But if you can demonstrate that maturity early in your career, then you won't need an MBA in a lot of firms to advance in the US context. In India, an MBA still is quite required to advance in finance.
The next question is about your latest career, which is Bharosa Club a social enterprise? Can you explain more about what you plan to accomplish, and is there anything relevant to high school students?
Yeah, so what Bharosa Club essentially attempts to accomplish is we want to make finance understandable for everybody. Because the reality is, even if you're not a finance major, you're going to need to learn finance in your life. And that's because everybody has to manage their personal finances, right? So over time, you're going to have savings. And what you do with those savings, how you manage expenses, how you invest in your child's education, how you invest in a house, all these things are going to make big differences to when you're able to retire. And what we want to do at Bharosa Club is to help people understand how to apply finance well in their lives. And are we a social enterprise? We're not completely socially driven. We want to do good for people. That's a core part of our mission. But we also want to do it in a way that's self-funding. We're not an NGO or anything. We charge 1,000 rupees for an annual membership at our club. But for a high school student, I think the best way to get involved with Bharosa Club is don't worry about a membership right now. You're not going to need it. You're not going to get value out of a membership. But what you guys should do is subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're interested in finance, and just watch our videos. We really take a lot of time to explain things in ways that we think are pretty understandable and intuitive. And this will be a good way for you to understand some basics on finance.
So our next question is, what are all the possible career options after a major in economics, since you come from that background?
So all the career options after economics, they're a broad range. I'd say there are really three classes that are most common. One is you can go into the research area and become a pure economist. So you can go into academia and become a professor and write research papers and basically work on theory, which is an option available. Another one is you can go into the world of finance, which we just discussed. And the last is common option that I see people take is they can go into consulting. So management consulting. So this basically means giving strategic advice to companies on how to deal with problems that they face. So for example, Disney may say that, we're trying to figure out where to open our next theme park. We don't know where. We want to hire a management consultant to help us answer that question. So then the management consultant will help them plan out all the different options they have, what's the good things about this place, bad things about this place, etc., etc. So they work on special projects for companies. Those are kind of the three most common paths that I see, but there are also others beyond that, but these are the three most common.
Could you share your journey rising the rungs of the ladder in finance?
Sure. I think at the junior level, the most important thing in finance, in the career path I took, which was investment banking and then private equity and then hedge funds, the most important thing at the junior level was to have a really good attitude, work really hard, not complain, because you're going to be working really, really hard in these careers, and just try and learn as much as you could. Ask questions when you didn't understand something, and basically also always admit when you made a mistake, because you're working on very, very important stuff, where a single mistake that you make, you move the decimal point one place too far, that just messes up all the numbers, right? So you have to be really open about your mistakes also at the junior level. Once you've done a lot of that stuff and demonstrated that you understand how to analyze the data, you've done a really good job as a junior person. As you get more senior in finance, what becomes increasingly important is how presentable are you? Can you go to a management meeting? Can you interface with CEOs? Can you interface with senior people? Because you're going to be a young guy. You're going to be 28, 27, and you're going to be dealing with 40, 50-year-olds, who are in the prime of their career. Can you hold your own with them? Can you ask questions? Can you come across as mature? Can you, do you have that maturity to have a seat at the table in conversations like that? That becomes very important. Then also, do you have the creativity to come up with investment ideas yourself? Or are you just good at doing the data analysis? So that's kind of what becomes increasingly important as you rise the rungs of finance. The job changes texture and characteristics as you become more senior.
So our last question for today is,
Sure.
What's your opinion on AI, and do you think it will disrupt jobs in the finance sector?
What's my opinion on?
Artificial
AI. Okay. Very good question. I'll be honest, I haven't given much thought to it, but let me answer it on the fly. I think it's a fantastic question. I think there'll be some areas where AI will make a dent in finance jobs. I think, for example, some of the areas where AI could sort of create dents sooner rather than later are probably areas that tend to be more mechanical. they tend to be areas where they're more calculation heavy and less creativity heavy, because I feel like AI is making lots of progress on automation and less progress on creativity and pattern recognition and all these things. While even there, they're making strides. So I think, if I were to think of the areas most exposed to AI, I would think accounting may be an area where there may be some threat earlier rather than later. Even my business, right, which is hedge funds, stock investing, all these things, you're seeing the rise of quantitative funds, right, which are using AI to invest. So even over time, even areas like that could be under threat. But I think we're still a long ways out from seeing that. And look, I think one of the most important things as you guys, as youngsters, make your decisions, you're never going to be 100% right about the future. But the most critical thing that I'll tell you guys is that you can always pivot. Let's say that you pick accounting as your field, right? Because you really enjoy it, you're really good at it. And let's say that, 15 years later, AI is completely taken over accounting jobs. Okay. Now, all those skills you used in demonstrating talent for accounting also allow you to do many other things in finance. So the most important thing to understand as youngsters is that it's not a completely binary world where you either do this or you either do that. Everything has shades of gray in it. And, my career is a perfect example. I've done lots of different things. And, and my skills in one have translated into the other. So I wouldn't worry too much about AI and all these things right now. You're going to be just fine with the skill sets you develop, no matter which area of finance you pick. If you need to pivot later in your career, then you'll be able to just fine. You'll have tons of time to do that also.
Okay, so with that, we will conclude today's session. On behalf of all our viewers, we would like to thank you, Mr. Sahil Bhargava, for taking out the time to give us an insightful session into finance.
Great.
And on behalf, okay, go on.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everyone. A lot of good questions, and best of luck to everyone. And with that, I'll say good night.
Before you guys log out, just a quick reminder that our next session is with Abhijit Bhaduri on humanities. And for those interested, we will share the link to Bharosa Club's YouTube channel on the WhatsApp groups. Thank you all. Good night. Thank you again, Mr. Bhargava.
Good night.